Well, thank you so very much, Lois. It's great to see you. Uh, what a wonderful glimpse of nature in the background. It's wonderful to be here with the Jewish Council of Public Affairs, and I look forward to my conversation in just a few moments with my brother Corey Shapiro. And so I'm going to try to defy Baptist gravity and be brief. Let me put my timer here in front of me. They asked me to talk for about 8 minutes, and then Corey and I will have some conversation. But thank all of you for being here. And gosh, do we all not remember and miss and continue to love the great John Lewis, who was my parishioner. I was his pastor, but he was the mentor, and his spirit lives on with us. It certainly was appropriate that he would receive the Tikkun Olam award, the sense in which his whole ministry, his work was about repairing the world. I'm grateful to my colleagues who were in the previous section of the program, Rabbi Lydia Medwin of the Temple, who is my sister in so many ways, and who really should have an office at Ebenezer Church. She's there so much doing the work that we do together. And the Reverend John Vaughn, who is our executive pastor, and I'm so very blessed and fortunate to have him there. And folks wonder how in the world is the pastor the senator, and the senator still a pastor? A big part of that answer is the Reverend John Vaughn, our executive pastor, who is well able, and we work together in partnership with other parts of our ministry at Ebenezer Church. But thank you all so much. It's so important for us to come together in this way. And as you continue the work that you are doing, advocating in the state of Georgia and advocating on Capitol Hill, you are helping us to make change on all the issues that are important to us as people of faith, as people of moral courage. And I'm grateful for the work of the JCPA. And I'm so excited about the conversation that's been going on in the midst of this conference. Glad to see your sessions tackling such issues as racism and anti-Semitism, poverty and equity, voting rights, and criminal justice. These are issues that I've worked on my entire career. I've been focused on it in my pastoral work as an activist. And it is that work really that has led me to the United States Senate. Let me say how proud I am of the state of Georgia. I know Georgia is in the news right now, and there's a lot of discussion about the voter suppression bill, and that's exactly what it is that passed a few weeks ago. And we certainly need to talk about that, and I've got ideas about how we address that. But, as a proud Georgia boy, I don't want us to get so caught up in that conversation that the other folks on this call and in this conference from around the country forget that, after all, Georgia saved the country just a couple months ago. Don't forget that. It was Georgia that pushed against the ugly side of our history, and in one fell swoop, elected the first Jewish senator and the first African-American senator from the state of Georgia to the United States Senate. And when Georgia did that, we gave the majority to the Democrats with Chuck Schumer as our leader. And because we were able to do that, we've been able to push forward the most progressive parts of the president's agenda. We were able to pass in short order, while nominating or confirming nominations to the cabinet. We were able to pass in short order the American Rescue Plan, a $1.9 trillion historic piece of legislation that literally puts shots in people's arms as we push against this pandemic, provides much needed economic relief to American families as they are wrestling in the midst of an economic turn down, the likes of which we have not seen in a couple of generations as a result of the pandemic. We would not have been able to pass the American Rescue Plan, which we did through reconciliation. We would be having a very different conversation had Georgia not shown up in the way that it did and sent John Ossoff, my brother from another mother, and Raphael Warnock to the United States Senate so that we could push forward this agenda. And now we pivot to the American Jobs Plan, which is infrastructure, clean energy jobs, sustainable roads, housing, broadband, repairing our bridges and our virtual bridges. I often say that our broken infrastructure in our country, and we are long overdue. We've been talking about infrastructure for a couple of generations. We haven't done it yet. As long as I've been paying attention to politics, we've been threatening to do a robust infrastructure plan. It's past time for us to finally do it. I often say that our broken infrastructure in this country is a reflection of the brokenness in our politics. Because when you talk about roads and bridges and airports and ports, when you talk about green space and your public parks, you're talking about, if you will, the family room. You're talking about our shared space, the space that we share together as an American people, as an American family. And all families have some level of dysfunction. Yours too, let's be honest. All of our families have some dysfunction. But sometimes families get caught up in a rut and folks are having a fight or an argument or a disagreement, however you want to describe it. And sometimes it's been going on so long, people don't even remember what it's about. People just kind of mad, forgive me, not good preacher or senator talk, just kind of in a funk and you're not even sure what it's about anymore. And, sometimes when you can't come to terms on all the issues, sometimes the best thing you can do is to get busy working on something together. Go to the Home Depot. I mentioned that. That's a great Georgia company. And, buy some supplies, upgrade the kitchen, paint the garage, paint the fence, add some outside lighting. In other words, get involved in the work of home improvement. And while you're engaged in a home improvement project, maybe you can have some conversation about the other issues that are kind of gnawing at you. And right now we got some folk who are busy trying to stir up the stuff that gnaws at us. They're trying to accentuate our differences. They're sowing the seeds of division in the American family. And we're seeing the emergence in dangerous ways, right, of a kind of robust and unembarrassed anti-Semitism and racism and bigotry. And then there are things that we've just been trying to figure out for a long time. I'm saying that America needs a big home improvement project. We need to get involved in some work together, put our people back to work, create some jobs that pay a livable wage, spur the economy coming out of this pandemic, and position the American economy to lead well into the 21st century. And so that's work that I'll be focused on in the days ahead, and know that as I do it as a United States Senator representing the great state of Georgia, I will do it led always by my values of justice, truth-telling, love. We don't talk about love in politics, but love is the most powerful force in the world. And justice is what love looks like in public. I will be led by my values. And it is these values that have caused me to stand up time and time again, first as a citizen, as a pastor, against the things that would divide us and then destroy us. But now that I'm in the Senate, one of my early actions was to join the Senate Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism. And we recently sent a bipartisan letter urging President Biden to nominate a qualified ambassador to monitor and combat rising anti-Semitism worldwide. And I'll be doing everything I can to make sure that this gets done. We have to stand up for one another. Martin Niemöller, the great pastor during Hitler's Third Reich, said first they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak because I was not a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak. And so that's why we've got to stand up for one another. It's the reason why I was proud to be one of the co-sponsors of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, standing up against anti-Asian bigotry and hate crimes that took the lives of several innocent folks just a few weeks ago in our great state of Georgia. And then we've got to continue to stand up as my friends Rabbi Medwin and Reverend John Vaughn were talking about right before I came on. We've got to continue to stand up in America for the need to address the issue of criminal justice reform. We've got to pass the George Floyd Act. But I've been saying for years that police brutality is driven by a more basic problem in America, and that is mass incarceration. Since about 1980 or so, our country has invested way too much in the logic of incarceration. And as a result of that, when we could have been investing in people, we were investing in controlling people. And as a result of that, we have by far the largest carceral complex in the world. We got more people in prison than anybody in the world. We got a greater percentage of our people in prison than anybody in the world. The land of the free is the incarceration capital of the world. I don't have to preach that sermon to this group. I'm preaching to the choir. But know that that is the work that I've been doing for years. It is the reason why I conceived the Ending Mass Incarceration work, and we launched it along with our friends at the Temple a couple of years ago. Proud of that work. It continues to drive what I do in the Senate. And then in closing, and nobody believes the preacher when he says in closing, we've got to work on voting rights to make sure that we secure the franchise. Yes, they're trying to make it harder in the state of Georgia to vote. And it is the reason why I am a lead co-sponsor of the For the People Act. And I'll be pushing also for the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We can talk more about that in the Q&A period, but it is important work. We've got to push back against those who are engaged in a project of what I call democracy in reverse, a situation in which rather than the citizens picking their politicians, the politicians are trying to cherry pick their voters. It cannot stand. We who believe in America, we who believe in democracy, we who believe in the covenant we have with one another as an American people, e pluribus unum, out of many one. There's no more sacred and urgent work that we must do in this moment than expanding access to the ballot and securing the right to vote. And so that's why I'm grateful that there's a JCPA. I'm inspired by the work that you've been doing for so very long, for decades, and I look forward to working with you in the seasons ahead.
Thank you so much, Senator Warnock, and you inspire us, you inspire me, and your leadership on all these issues throughout the years has been so important and so vital for the work that we all are doing. And so thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today and speaking to the folks here at our conference. My first question for you is, as a faith leader, what made you decide to seek public office? And how do you see your faith and your public advocacy working together to achieve your vision for being a senator during this particular moment in history?
Yeah. Thank you so much for the question, Corey. Listen, everything that I have tried to do in my public life has been driven by my faith. And it may seem like a rather unusual, and it is an unusual step for a pastor to take, to decide to run for office and then high public office. But for me, my campaign for the Senate, in which I got a chance to raise the issues that I've been working on for years, and then my election to the United States Senate, is a continuation of my lifelong commitment to service. I've been talking about voting rights, not just talking about it. We register voters at Ebenezer. And by the way, those who are here and part of various faith communities know that is work that you can do in your church or your temple. That is nonpartisan work. We register voters after worship, after our weekend services, because for me, a vote is a kind of prayer for the kind of world that we desire for us and our children. And so I've been registering voters. I served for a while as chair of the New Georgia Project, where we registered hundreds of thousands of new voters. And when Georgia went too far with the issue of voter suppression, my church actually voted. My board agreed, and we decided to become a plaintiff, and we sued the state of Georgia for its voter suppression tactics. My church has been bailing poor people out of jail for years who were there, not because they were dangerous, but because they couldn't afford bail, as a way of talking about bail reform and the need for bail reform. We have been engaged. We hosted the first expungement event in the state of Georgia, and then later partnered again with our friends at the Temple, because there's nothing like great work in the kind of Black Jewish coalition that we've had over the years. We had a great Veterans Day expungement event at the Temple a few years ago, and we've done a few since then. We have worked on addressing the issue of human trafficking, labor trafficking, and sex trafficking, again, with the Temple. We have been involved, of course, with the work of mass incarceration. So all of this work has been a part of my ministry. And often it has placed me in confrontation with the pharaohs of this world. And when I say the pharaohs of this world, I'm not talking so much about a person as much as I'm talking about a system. I don't mean to demonize anybody, but I'm talking about the system of Pharaoh. It has put me in confrontation with what we call in the Christian tradition powers and principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. And in fact, the last time I came to the Capitol before getting elected, I came with a group of clergy, and the Congress was busy passing then, at that time in 2017, another roughly $2 trillion bill. But that bill was very different from the one that I just helped pass. That bill was largely a tax cut to the riches of the riches of the rich in the country. It gave far more to folks who are in the top 1% and 5% than the whole rest of the country. And so when they were passing that bill, I came to this Capitol where I sit today, and I began to say that a budget is not just a fiscal document, it's a moral document. Show me a nation's budget and I'll show you its values, who you think matters and who doesn't, who is necessary and who's indispensable and who's dispensable and disposable. And we began to pray and sing, an ecumenical group of us, in the rotunda of the Capitol. And the Capitol Police showed up, and they said, you can't gather here and pray and sing. We'll give you 3 warnings. And after the 3rd warning, we'll have to arrest you. Well, the only issue with that declaration is that I had already been arrested. I'd been arrested before, but I mean in a deeper sense. My mind and my imagination had been arrested by this idea that we as a nation are better than this. We're better than taking resources from those who need it the most in order to give a tax cut to those who need it the least. And so we began to kneel, and we stayed there, and Capitol Police, they were very professional. I cast no aspersions. These are the folks who are keeping me safe right now as I sit in this office. They were very professional, but they did their job, and I was doing mine in the great spirit of civil disobedience, embraced by Abraham Joshua Heschel as he marched alongside Dr. King in Selma. And they took us to central booking in 2017. Well, I decided to run for the United States Senate in 2020 to give those Capitol Police officers an opportunity to escort me one more time. And so every day now when I drive up to the Capitol, the officers who were doing their job that day and escorted me to central booking, every now and then escort me around the Capitol to make sure I get to my next appointment. And so for me, it's about moving from being a movement from protest to public policy, translating my work of activism and agitation into legislation. It is, for me, the work of the Lord.
Thank you. Well, we're all glad that you did decide to run in 2020 and that we now have your voice in the Senate. And you're talking about African-American Jewish relationships and that coalition that's been formed. As a multiracial Jewish community, we dedicated this conference to set strategies for achieving racial justice in America. And last night, we watched a movie and heard Ambassador Andrew Young and Sherry Frank, and you were in the movie as well, speak from Atlanta about revitalizing the African-American Jewish Alliance. And you hail from Atlanta, where it was the center of the civil rights movement. And so what recommendations and best practices would you like to share with our audience on how we can keep building those relationships?
You know, there's something about a history and experience immersed in suffering and immersed in oppression that gives one a certain kind of perspective on the world. And Black people in this country and around the world, for that matter, and our Jewish sisters and brothers, have a kind of sacred history that is immersed in, baptized, if you will, in suffering. And out of that has come a kind of freedom faith that sees human flourishing and human freedom as a divine undertaking, and a recognition that when we are engaged in that work, we're not doing simply a political thing, that we are partners with God, who, when he shows up in Exodus chapter 3, God identifies God in this way: I am the Lord your God. I have seen your affliction. I've seen the taskmasters. I have heard your cry. I have come down to deliver you out of the hands of the Egyptians into the good and spacious land. It is the work of salvation. I remind my Christian sisters and brothers who sometimes too often talk about salvation in terms that are much too narrow and individualistic, that the basic notion of salvation in Scripture really is literally the broadening of communal space. Another way of thinking about it is creating a world that's big enough for all of us to breathe. We can all breathe. Tragically, that's what George Floyd died saying: I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And so poor people in many ways have a knee on their neck, somebody squeezing the life out of them, in his case, literally. But it's the reason why we fight, and we've had to stand up time and time again, right, against anti-Semitism, against racism, and for voting rights, and for livable wages, and for a nation that invests less in a carceral state and more in preschool, because we have these histories that give us what the liberation theologians call the hermeneutical privilege of the poor, or the epistemological privilege of the oppressed, that oppressed people see things in a certain kind of way because of their history, and they see it, it gives them a kind of wisdom and insight that then calls all of us together to build what Dr. King called the beloved community. And so all I would say to all of us today is let's continue to lean into that story. It's a story that's so inspiring that slaves in the American context took it up, and the song of Moses and Miriam became our song. And we sang about it in a way that you couldn't tell where Moses and Miriam's story ended and where ours began. And we, in our case, connected it to Jesus, whom we see as liberator and Lord. And we sang, you know, go down Moses, tell Pharaoh, let my people go. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. And then we asked when we got close to Easter, were you there when they crucified my Lord? It causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there? Because it was our lived experience. And so what we've got to do is lean into that shared story. Number one. Number two, we've got to continue to build relationships. Rabbi Peter Berg is my friend and my brother. And we're able to do great work together because we talk to each other before the crisis shows up. So when the crisis shows up, I literally can call him and say, can you come to my church in 20 minutes? Something, you know, the president of the United States has said something that is just terribly outrageous on the eve of Dr. King's birthday, and we must address it. And he showed up, and we stood there in the sanctuary, and we spoke to the issue. Or when he's called me, or when I've heard about an attack on a temple or a synagogue, I reach out to him. It's a relationship that we already have, so that when the 911 emergency happens, and an attack on one of us, the relationships are already deep, authentic, and real. Let's keep building on that. I could say much more, but I'll stop there.
I could listen to you for hours, Senator. So I don't want to stop you, but I do have another question that we want to ask you, and that I'm curious, because it's an issue that I care a lot about. Earlier today, I moderated a panel on voting rights, and one of our panelists was from Atlanta, from Fair Fight. And this issue is incredibly important to JCPA, and I said me personally, and we have worked on voting rights for decades. As you mentioned, Georgia has been at the center of voting rights battles in the courts, in the legislature, and in voter mobilization. So I'm curious, even in just a few months that you've been in the Senate, what are some of the ways that you think the Jewish community can support those efforts, particularly with HR 1 and HR 4 at the federal and also at the local level in fighting voter suppression efforts around the country?
Please hear me, my sisters and brothers, everybody listening to this and connected to this conference. There's no more important moral work than we can be doing right in this moment than defending the right to vote. Voting rights are preservative of all other rights. So I'm not saying that voting rights is more important than I'm saying that in a democracy, all the things that we're fighting for presuppose the reality of the people being able to speak in their democracy, and therefore direct the direction of their country and their destiny within it. So whether we're talking about mass incarceration or an infrastructure bill or COVID relief, if there's a widening gap between what the people actually want and what they can get, then everything else that's at stake for us is imperiled. So we have to fight. We have to insist on the right to vote. So the last time the 1965 voting rights law that John Lewis, as he used to say in his own humble way, he gave a little blood for on that bridge. Truth is, he almost died. Viola Luiso did die fighting for voting rights. Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, two Jews and an African American, did die. Medgar Evers did die. The last time that law was reauthorized was in 2006. George W. Bush, a Republican, was president. It passed the Senate that I'm now a member of 98-0. Excuse me, 96-0. Now, voting rights used to be, ought to be bipartisan. But something has shifted in the last few years. Supreme Court asked the Congress to update Section 4 of the Voting Rights Bill. That's what the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is. There are 16 members of the Senate right now who they were either in the Senate or they may have been House members. But hear me, there are 16 members of the Senate right now Republicans, who voted to authorize the voting rights law in 2006. So part of what you can ask them is what changed? You voted for it in 2006. John Lewis is an effort to update the law so that states like Georgia, if you act right, you can get out of it. You don't have to continue to deal with pre-clearance. Just show a record of openness to everybody's right to the franchise. So we got to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act because that protects the franchise. But we also have to pass, be really clear, we also have to pass the For the People Act because that expands our access to the ballot. And if we don't pass For the People, a lot of the things that were done in the Georgia bill and some 47 other states will not be corrected. We don't correct some of these horrible bills that we've been talking about the last few weeks. They don't get corrected simply by passing John Lewis. And I won't get into all the technicalities, it takes way too long. Just know that the only way you fix some of those things is you got to pass For the People and you got to pass John Lewis. So in the ways that you can gather your organization, your congregations, the places where you have influence, the people you can call on both sides of the aisle, that's the work we've got to do. We have to defend our democracy. If we do not, we're going to see an increasing chasm between the will of the people and what they actually get. Let me give you one small example. You can, and this is the case now, you can gerrymander districts in such a way that when you look at a state legislature and you see how people voted and the representation that's in that legislature, it doesn't really make sense. Like, if this many people voted this way, how do you get, you understand? Because of the way they've drawn the lines, which also gets addressed in the For the People Act. So partisan and racial gerrymandering, the outsized influence of money in our politics, the fact that voting just ought to be easy. People ought to be registered. You ought to be able to register online. You must have early voting, weekend voting, drop boxes. All of that is for the people. Stand up for the people.
So JCPA I want to talk a little bit about criminal justice reform, and JCPA has made this a priority. We just heard about the launching of the Jewish Network on Criminal Justice Reform, and we heard about raising the faith voice to end mass incarceration. You were instrumental in launching the EMI in Atlanta. Why is criminal justice reform so important to you, and what are some of the goals that you have set for yourself as a senator on this very important issue?
I'll be really quick here, Corey, because I'm seeing your note that says we got to wrap this up. This is what happens when you ask a Baptist preacher to close out the conference. So let me wrap this up. So I'm very focused on George Floyd. We've got to address the issue of mass incarceration, which is driven in large part by the so-called war on drugs. And so let me just say what the opportunity here, one of the opportunities here is this. When in 1980, the drug was crack and the bodies, at least that we saw, were brown and black, we had a war on drugs. Now we're dealing with an opioid epidemic that is largely rural, suburban, and white. And now we have a public health emergency.